I'm your host, Davida Shinsky, and welcome to Live Without Limits. Today's short show is titled 10 Practical Things That You Can Do to Improve Your Communication Skills. And why are we talking about communication? Well, communication is a very important part of how we relate to people, how we build relationships, and the way we communicate, whether we communicate in a way that's very toxic or whether the workplace culture, either one of those types of relationships all are based on good communication. Tony Robbins says, communication is power. Those who have mastered its effective use can change their own experience of the world and the world's experience of them. All behavior and feelings find their original roots in some form of communication. Miscommunication could quickly be the death of any relationship. And you've likely heard before what improving your communication is essential for healthy relationships. But how can you do that? Are there any books or other tools that you can use? In this article or in this show, we're going to dive headfirst into interpersonal communication and how you can improve your interpersonal skills. So, let's start with the basics. What is good communication? Good communication comes down to a variety of factors. And yes, it's up to both the message giver and receiver to make communicating effective. Essentially, healthy communication is the ability to communicate in a clear and honest way, helping you negotiate conflict and convey your feelings, all while considering the receiver's feelings. Yet, it's not just about what's being said. The listener should use active listening to receive the message being said. This means attentively listening to the message being conveyed and not thinking about knee-jerk response. You want to first understand. From there, you should reflect, then respond. In fact, I've written a whole course on listening and showing you how to improve your listening skills, and it sits on my membership site, which is askdavidashinsky.com. The listener should use active listening to receive the message being said. That means attentively listening to the message being conveyed and not thinking about the knee-jerk response. You want to first understand. From there, you should reflect, then respond. Sometimes the response involves a simple acknowledgement. Other times it requires something a little bit more in depth. When it comes down to it, being a better communicator is about improving your listening skills and improving your ability to express yourself to others. So let's look at how you can do all of that. Now, here's the one thing I'm going to say about this. Previously, in corporations, they used to teach a lot of these programs to their management level people and to their employees. But corporations have gotten away from doing all of this type of training. So if you want to learn these skills, you need to find other sources in order to improve your communication. So how to improve communication skills? Interpersonal communication is called interpersonal communication because it's taking place between two people. Maybe you grew up in a family that was just bad at communicating, or you've picked up some bad habits along the way. Regardless, it's always a good idea to brush up on your communication skills and remind yourself of how to do it so in a healthy and effective way. And it's important to again note it's between two people. Both parties involved have to be committed to improving communication for any relationship to work. It's a two-way street. Now, before I actually get into the 10 things, what I also want to talk about is body language is an important part of communication. Because if you look at the eyes, if you look at the hands, if you look at whether they're open, whether they're closed, then you can tell whether or not what someone's saying is in conjunction with what they're feeling because their body language can tell you a totally different story from what they're actually saying. So practice active listening. Misunderstandings are all too common, yet many of these misunderstandings could be well avoided by simply listening. And this doesn't mean listening and responding with the first thing that pops into your head. It means active listening. As previously stated above, this means looking to understand the message being said rather than just reacting. If you don't understand after some reflection, it can help to ask questions. More on this in a bit. But also, when you're talking to someone, if you say back to them something that they've said, then you can basically let them know that you actually heard what they said. Take into account who you're talking to. If it's your mom, a mentor, your SO, or your significant other, these differences matter and not in the way you might think. Just because you had a bad day, this doesn't mean that you have leeway to say whatever you want to your significant other. They have feelings too. But knowing your audience can help you convey your message in a way that the other person will understand, which is undeniably important when talking or trying to solve a problem with others. Pay attention to your body language. See there? That's exactly what I was talking about. Body language is a very important part of communication. If you're speaking nicely, but your arms are crossed and you're frowning, this probably won't come off of how you intended to. Body language matters. In most cases, talking with your legs and arms uncrossed and maintaining a natural expression can help navigate through and also avoid someone else from interpreting the opposite of your intention. You know, if your arms are crossed like this, then what you're basically saying is you're not accepting the other person that you're talking to. You're closed off to them. You don't want them to know what you're actually feeling. And so that what you're saying is something very, very different than what you're actually telling them in words. Ask questions. Not sure what someone else meant? Are you making assumptions? These are good questions to ask yourself. Then, once you have the answers, you'll want to probe the other person. What did they mean when they said whatever? Ask. Assumptions never help anyone. Think before you talk. Many of us are very reactive creatures. And if you tend to respond without thinking, this is your sign to take a breath, acknowledge you heard the other person, and take a moment to think about your response. This is also why it's never best to dig into conflict in a rush. Thinking over what you're going to say can help you course correct. This means that you can determine the possible outcomes, decide what you want the outcome to be, and try to make that outcome happen through words that you choose. The same goes for text conversations or email. Always read over what you're about to say before pressing send. Be specific. Generalized statements tend to confuse people. Thus, the more specific, the better. Instead of saying that thing, name the object. If you're recalling an event, be specific about the when and where. Again, the more info, the better. At least this is true in most cases. In some situations, being overly specific, such as during an argument, can come off as blaming, which usually doesn't help with reaching a solution or getting a message across. Use the one wisely. Remain positive and optimistic. This is basically a rule for life in general. If you're even heard of the law of attraction, you might know that most of the time you get what you put out into the world. If you're giving someone rude vibes, chances are they might be rude right back. Going in with positive and optimism will probably give you the same back. Try it out. Make eye contact. Eye contact is part of the whole body language side of things with good and effective communication. Yet, you don't want to be giving too much. You want just enough to show trustworthiness and credibility. Generally, you want to maintain eye contact for about 50% of the time that you speak, or about 4 to 5 seconds each time. Don't bring up past conflicts. This is mostly to do with disagreements, and you probably run into one of a few times before. When has it ever helped to bring up past conflicts or disagreements? Basically, never. Stick to the topic on hand and avoid tangents. Tangents just confuse and muddle things. Use when you blank. I feel blank statements, meaning that what you're doing is you're telling someone exactly what it is that you don't like about their behavior. This is another great communication technique when experiencing disagreements. Use this as your template to convey your feelings without blaming the other person. Rather, this indicates that they influence how you felt, but it doesn't put full blame on them. Instead, it helps to understand when a parent talks to a child, what do? They, if you're going to discipline a child, you need to let them know exactly what you're disciplining them for and what the bad behavior is. and let them know that just because you're spanking them for doing something bad doesn't mean that you don't love them. It's so important because what you're conveying when you're disciplining a child, it can be there's a fine line between what's discipline and what's abuse. And often in the past, parents would often use corporal punishments and they were never clear as to the child for what they were disciplining them for. Now, use effective communication techniques. All right, so you've got 10 ways to communicate better. What else is there? So try using the 7 C's of communication: clear, correct, complete, concrete, concise, consideration, courteous. Additionally, practicing empathy can go a long way. This means being able to understand and share the feelings of another. This can especially help the personal communication so that you can more clearly understand one another and avoid stepping on one another's toes. Tools to improve communication skills. What else can you turn to improving your communication skills? Try these books: How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. You're Not Listening by Kate Murphy. Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. Alternatively, there are also a variety of podcasts outlining effective communication techniques. So grab little snippets each day from them and try them out in action. Start communicating effectively today. Effective and good communication isn't a secret. There are endless resources to choose from. After learning a bit more about it, the next step is taking action. Use the above to improve communication in the workplace and at home. Things start getting so much easier when communication is crystal clear. Now, I'm going to also finish up by talking to you about different behavior patterns because how you communicate is also based on whether you have the dominant behavior pattern, whether or not you have good interpersonal skills, whether you're very reserved and back from the steadiness or conscientiousness behavior patterns.